The blood on her hands would not wash away no matter how hard Miriam Keller scrubbed them in the creek, and the dawn light filtering through the cottonwood trees made the water look pink as it swirled around her wrists. She had killed a man last night, shot him dead when he had tried to force himself on her, after she had refused his advances at the saloon where she worked serving drinks. And now, she knelt here in the New Mexico wilderness wondering if she should just let herself drown in this shallow water rather than face what came next. The year was 1878, and women like her, women who worked in saloons and had no family to vouch for their character, rarely found justice in situations like these. She heard the horse before she saw its rider, the steady clip of hooves on the hard-packed earth making her freeze like a rabbit that had spotted a hawk. Miriam looked up through the tangle of her dark hair, still damp from where she had dunked her whole head underwater trying to clear the ringing in her ears from the gunshot, and saw a tall man astride a paint horse watching her from the far bank. He wore a dark hat pulled low and a leather vest over a faded blue shirt, and his weathered face held an expression she could not quite read in the early morning shadows. "You hurt?" His voice carried across the creek, deep and steady without a hint of threat in it. Miriam shook her head, then realized how that must look, a woman covered in blood claiming she was not injured. "Not my blood," she said, her voice cracking on the words. "I killed someone." Most men would have ridden off right then, or worse, would have seen an opportunity in a desperate woman alone in the wilderness. This man did neither. He dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible, and led his horse to the water's edge. "You look like you need help." "I don't deserve help." The words came out before she could stop them, automatic as breathing. Her whole life had taught her this lesson. Born to a prostitute who had died when Miriam was 12, raised by a string of reluctant relatives who had made it clear she was a burden, she had learned early that kindness was not meant for girls like her. The cowboy crouched down on his side of the creek, still keeping that respectful distance. "Name's Zachary Frost," he said, "and I've found that folks who say they don't deserve kindness are usually the ones who need it most." Miriam studied him properly now. He looked to be in his mid-20s, maybe 4 or 5 years older than her own 21 years, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes that were a startling shade of green against his tanned face. There was a gentleness in those eyes that made something in her chest ache, because she could not remember the last time anyone had looked at her like she was a person worth caring about. "The sheriff in White Oaks will be looking for me," she said. "The man I killed, he was the deputy's cousin." Zachary's jaw tightened. "What did he do to make you shoot him?" "He tried to force himself on me. I said no. He did not care." The words were flat, emotionless, because if she let herself feel the terror of last night she would fall apart completely. "Then you did what you had to do." Zachary stood and stepped into the creek, water filling his boots as he waded across to her side. "But you're right that Sheriff Carson won't see it that way, not if the dead man was kin to his deputy." Miriam scrambled backward, suddenly terrified that she had misjudged this stranger, that he would grab her and drag her back to town to collect some reward. But Zachary just held out his hand, palm up, an offering, not a demand. "I've got a small ranch about 10 miles north of here, up in the foothills. It's not much, just me and my horses and a couple of cattle, but you could rest there while we figure out what to do next. Why would you help me?" Miriam searched his face for the catch, the hidden price she would be expected to pay. "Because it's the right thing to do," Zachary said simply. "And because I know what it's like to be judged for things outside your control." She wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him that she was fine on her own, but the truth was she had nowhere to go and no plan beyond washing the blood off and running until her legs gave out. Slowly, hesitantly, Miriam reached up and placed her still damp hand in his. His grip was warm and calloused and steady, and when he pulled her to her feet he did it gently, as though she was something precious that might break. "I don't have anything to repay you with," she said, needing him to understand that she could not give him what most men wanted from women like her. "I'm not asking for payment." Zachary led her to his horse, then paused. "Can you ride?" Miriam nodded. Her uncle had owned a farm, and before he had sent her away at 15 to make her own way in the world, she had learned to handle horses. Zachary swung up into the saddle and extended his arm down to her. She grasped it and let him pull her up behind him, settling awkwardly on the horse's rump with her arms wrapped around his waist. She could feel the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the solid warmth of his body through his shirt, and something about it made her want to cry for reasons she could not name. They rode in silence through the breaking dawn, leaving the creek behind and heading into rougher country where juniper and piñon pine clung to rocky hillsides. The sun climbed higher, burning away the coolness of the night and turning the sky that particular shade of endless blue that New Mexico was known for. Miriam pressed her face against Zachary's back and tried not to think about the dead man she had left behind in the saloon, tried not to hear the echo of the gunshot that still rang in her ears. The ranch, when they reached it, was as modest as Zachary had promised. A small cabin built of rough-hewn logs sat in a narrow valley with a stream running through it, and a simple corral held 3 horses who whinnied greetings as Zachary rode up. There was a barn, barely more than a lean-to really, and a chicken coop from which the sound of clucking emerged. It was humble and isolated and more peaceful than anywhere Miriam had been in years. Zachary dismounted and helped her down, his hands respectful on her waist. "You should clean up properly," he said, gesturing to the cabin. "I've got a wash basin inside and some clothes that might fit you." "They were my mother's." "Your mother?" Miriam followed him inside, blinking as her eyes adjusted to the dimmer interior. "She died 2 years ago, fever." Zachary's voice was matter-of-fact, but Miriam heard the grief underneath it. "It was just her and me out here. My father died when I was a boy, and Ma was determined to keep the ranch going." He opened a trunk in the corner and pulled out a simple dress of faded calico. "She was about your size." Miriam took the dress, her fingers tracing the worn fabric. "I'm sorry about your mother. And I'm sorry about whatever you've been through." Zachary met her eyes, and there was such sincerity in his gaze that Miriam had to look away. "I'll be outside tending the animals. Take your time." After he left, Miriam stood alone in the cabin and let herself really breathe for the first time since the previous night. The single room was clean and sparse, with a bed in one corner, a table and 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove, and shelves lined with supplies. It was the home of someone who worked hard and lived simply, and there was something honest about it that made Miriam's heart ache. She found the wash basin and a cloth and scrubbed every inch of exposed skin until she was sure all traces of blood were gone. Then she stripped off her saloon dress, a garish red thing with black lace that the owner had required all the serving girls to wear, and pulled on the calico dress Zachary had given her. It was loose in some places and tight in others, but it was clean and modest and made her look like a respectable woman instead of a saloon girl. When she emerged from the cabin, she found Zachary forking hay into the corral. He looked up and something shifted in his expression when he saw her, a softening around his eyes that made Miriam's cheeks flush. "Better?" he asked. "Yes, thank you." She twisted her hands together, unsure what to do with herself. "I could help if you tell me what needs doing." "You don't have to earn your keep," Zachary said. "You've had a hard night, you should rest." "I don't know how to rest." It was true. For as long as Miriam could remember, she had been working, earning her place, proving she deserved the small amount of space she took up in the world. Zachary studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, you can gather the eggs from the chickens if you want. Coop's over there." It was simple work, familiar work, and Miriam found herself falling into the rhythm of it gratefully. The hens fussed and clucked, but let her reach under them to retrieve the warm eggs, and she carried them carefully back to the cabin in her borrowed apron. When she returned outside, Zachary was hauling water from the stream in wooden buckets. "Let me help with that," Miriam said, reaching for one of the buckets. "It's heavy," Zachary warned, but he let her take it. The bucket was indeed heavy, and Miriam's arms trembled with the effort of carrying it, but she gritted her teeth and made it to the trough without spilling. Zachary did not comment on her struggle, just fetched another bucket and walked beside her as they made several more trips together. By the time the sun was high overhead, Miriam was exhausted but felt more grounded than she had since the previous night. Physical work had always been her way of making sense of chaos, and there was something calming about the simple repetitive tasks of ranch life. Zachary made lunch, which surprised her. Most men she knew expected women to do all the cooking, but he moved around the small kitchen area with the confidence of someone who had been feeding himself for years. He fried up eggs and salt pork and made coffee so strong it could probably strip paint, and they sat at the table together to eat. "You don't have to talk about what happened," Zachary said after they had eaten in silence for a while, "but if you want to, I'll listen." Miriam stared down at her empty plate. His name was Garrett Mason. He had been coming to the saloon for weeks, always watching me, always making comments. "Last night he followed me out back when I went to empty the slop buckets. He said I had been leading him on, said a woman like me should be grateful for his attention." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "He grabbed me and I fought back. I managed to get his gun from his holster and I shot him. I didn't mean to kill him, I just wanted him to let go, but the bullet hit him in the chest and he went down and he didn't get back up." "You did nothing wrong," Zachary said firmly. "A man tries to force a woman, he's got no one to blame but himself for what happens next. The law won't see it that way." Miriam finally looked up and met his eyes. "They'll say I'm a saloon girl, that I was asking for it, that I probably encouraged him, and even if they don't hang me for murder, they'll run me out of the territory or worse." Zachary was quiet for a moment, his jaw working as though he was chewing on his thoughts. "Then we need to make sure they don't find you. I can't hide here forever. Someone will come looking eventually. Maybe. But White Oaks is 20 miles south of here, and folks don't have much reason to come this far north unless they're passing through to Santa Fe. If we keep our heads down and you stay out of sight for a while, the trail might go cold." He reached across the table and laid his hand over hers, the gesture startling her with its tenderness. "I meant what I said earlier. You deserve kindness, Miriam, whether you believe it or not, and if you'll let me, I'll prove it to you every day until you start believing it yourself." Miriam felt tears sting her eyes, hot and unexpected. "Why? You don't even know me." "I know enough." Zachary's thumb traced a gentle circle on the back of her hand. "I know you fought back when someone tried to hurt you. I know you helped with chores today even though you were exhausted. I know you folded that dress I gave you real carefully before you put it on, like you were grateful for it. That tells me plenty about who you are." "I don't deserve kindness," Miriam whispered, the words barely audible, but Zachary heard them. "Then I'll prove you do every day," he replied with such quiet conviction that Miriam felt something crack open in her chest. Some hard defensive shell she had built around her heart starting to split apart. The days that followed fell into a pattern that was almost peaceful. Miriam rose with the sun and helped Zachary with the endless work of keeping the ranch running. She gathered eggs and fed the chickens, hauled water and weeded the small vegetable garden Zachary's mother had planted. She learned to milk the 2 cows and helped mend fences, and even tried her hand at training one of the young horses in the corral. Zachary was patient with her, teaching her tasks she did not know, and never making her feel foolish for her ignorance. He told her stories while they worked, tales of growing up on the ranch with his mother, of the struggles they had faced trying to make a living from the harsh New Mexico earth. His mother had been Apache, he explained, which was why he had such dark hair and bronze skin despite his father being white, and which was also why some of the ranchers in the area had never quite accepted them. "Ma taught me that being different doesn't make you less worthy," Zachary said one afternoon as they sat by the stream, cooling off from the midday heat. She faced a lot of cruelty because of who she was, but she never let it make her hard. She stayed kind, stayed generous, even to folks who didn't deserve it. "She sounds like she was an incredible woman," Miriam said softly. "She was." Zachary turned to look at her, and there was an intensity in his gaze that made Miriam's breath catch. "She would have liked you." "You can't know that." "I can. Ma always said you could tell the worth of a person by watching how they treat animals and how they handle work. You're gentle with the horses and you never complain about hard labor. That would have mattered to her." Miriam wanted to argue, wanted to list all the reasons why she was not the kind of person anyone's mother would approve of, but the words would not come. Instead, she found herself leaning slightly closer to Zachary, drawn by the warmth of him and the steady calm he radiated. It was Zachary who closed the distance, his hand coming up to cup her cheek with such gentleness that Miriam trembled. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, and the fact that he asked, that he waited for her permission instead of just taking what he wanted, made Miriam fall a little bit in love with him right then. "Yes," she breathed, and then his lips were on hers, soft and warm and tasting of coffee and sunshine. The kiss was chaste, almost reverent, nothing like the rough demands Miriam had experienced from men in the past. Zachary kissed her like she was precious, like she was something to be treasured, and when he pulled back his eyes were bright with an emotion that made Miriam's heart race. "I'm falling for you," he said simply. "I know it's too soon and we barely know each other, but I can't help it. There's something about you, Miriam, something that calls to me." "I'm falling for you too," Miriam admitted, the words terrifying and liberating all at once. "But I'm scared. I don't know how to be loved. I don't know how to trust that it will last." "Then let me teach you." Zachary took both her hands in his grip firm and reassuring. "Let me show you that love doesn't have to hurt, that it can be steady and true and patient." Over the following weeks, Zachary did exactly that. He courted her with a gentleness that bewildered and enchanted her in equal measure. He picked wildflowers and left them in a tin cup by her side of the table. He taught her to read the few words she had never learned, sitting with her in the evenings and patiently sounding out letters until she could make sense of them. He told her she was beautiful, not just her body but her spirit, her determination, the way she hummed while she worked. Miriam blossomed under his attention like a desert flower after rain. She found herself smiling more, laughing at Zachary's dry jokes, teasing him back when he got too serious. She started to believe, just a little bit, that maybe she did deserve this kindness, this care, this growing love between them. But the past has a way of catching up, no matter how far you run. It was late July when the riders came. 3 men on dusty horses who appeared at the edge of the property while Zachary was out checking his fences in the far pasture, and Miriam was in the cabin kneading bread dough. She heard the horses and looked out the window, her blood turning to ice when she recognized the star on one man's vest, Sheriff Carson from White Oaks, and with him 2 deputies, one of whom would be the cousin of the man she had killed. Miriam's hands shook as she wiped them on her apron. She could run, could try to make it to the barn and get on a horse, but they would see her and chase her down. She could hide, but they would search the cabin and find her anyway. Her options had run out. She stepped outside onto the small porch, lifting her chin with a bravery she did not feel. The sheriff reined in his horse and looked her over with hard eyes. "Well now," he said slowly, "you must be the woman we've been looking for. Miriam Keller, wanted for the murder of Garrett Mason." "It was self-defense," Miriam said, proud that her voice did not shake. "He attacked me." "That's not how I hear it." The deputy, who must have been Mason's cousin, spurred his horse forward, his face twisted with rage and grief. "You shot my cousin in cold blood, you saloon whore, and you're going to hang for it." "Now, Roy, let's keep this civil," Sheriff Carson said, but there was no real censure in his tone. He turned back to Miriam. "You need to come with us, Miss Keller. There's going to be a trial and a judge will sort out what really happened." Miriam knew what would happen at that trial. She would be convicted and hanged, and no one would speak up for her because no one ever spoke up for women like her. "She's not going anywhere with you." The voice came from behind the riders, and Miriam's heart leaped as she saw Zachary walking toward them, rifle held loosely but ready in his hands. He must have seen the riders from the far pasture and circled back quickly. "This is none of your business, Frost," Sheriff Carson said, his expression hardening. "This woman is wanted for murder." "This woman defended herself against a man who tried to rape her," Zachary replied, his voice level but laced with steel. "And you know as well as I do that she won't get a fair trial in White Oaks, not with Mason's family calling for her blood." "The law is the law," Carson said, but he looked uncomfortable. "The law should protect women from men who attack them, but we both know it doesn't always work that way." Zachary moved to stand beside Miriam on the porch, close enough that she could feel the solid presence of him. "I'm vouching for her character. She's been staying here, helping me run the ranch, and she's done nothing but work hard and keep to herself. You harboring a fugitive, Frost." Deputy Roy sneered. "That makes you guilty too. I'm providing shelter to a woman in need. There's no law against that." Zachary's grip on the rifle tightened slightly. "And I'm prepared to testify on her behalf about what kind of person she is." Sheriff Carson studied them both for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Finally, he sighed, a sound of deep weariness. "I'm not unsympathetic to her situation," he said quietly, and Miriam realized with a shock that he actually meant it. Mason had a reputation, and more than one woman has complained about his behavior. But his family is powerful, and they want justice for his death. If I don't bring her in, there will be trouble. "Then tell them you searched but couldn't find her," Zachary said. "Tell them she must have fled to Texas or California, that the trail went cold. You're asking me to lie to a dead man's family. I'm asking you to let justice be done instead of revenge." Zachary lowered the rifle slightly, a gesture of trust. "You know the difference, Sheriff. You've always been a fair man." Carson's jaw worked as he considered this. Beside him, Deputy Roy was practically vibrating with anger, but the third man, an older deputy whose name Miriam did not know, looked troubled and said nothing. "If I do this," Carson said slowly, "Miss Keller needs to disappear. She can't ever come back to White Oaks, can't ever give the Mason family reason to come looking for her again. And Frost, if anyone asks, you tell them you never saw her." "Agreed," Zachary said immediately. "No." Deputy Roy's voice was a snarl. "She murdered my cousin. She needs to pay." "Your cousin tried to force himself on her," Carson said, turning in his saddle to face his deputy. "I've heard the rumors about Garrett for years, Roy, and you have too." The man had a dark side, and it finally caught up with him. "I'm sorry for your loss, I truly am, but I won't send a woman to hang for defending herself." "Then you're a coward and a disgrace to that badge," Roy spat, but Carson just looked at him with tired eyes. "Maybe. But I'll sleep better at night than I would if I let her hang." He turned back to Miriam and Zachary. "You two stay out of sight for a good long while. If things settle down and folks forget, maybe eventually it will be safe for you to move around more freely. But for now, keep your heads down." "Thank you," Miriam said, her voice thick with emotion she could barely contain. "Thank you for believing me." Carson nodded once, then wheeled his horse around. "Come on, boys. The trail's gone cold. We've got nothing to report." Deputy Roy looked like he wanted to argue further, but the older deputy grabbed his horse's bridle and pulled him along. The three riders headed back south, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Miriam's legs gave out and she sat down hard on the porch steps, shaking with relief and residual terror. Zachary set his rifle aside and sat beside her, pulling her into his arms. She buried her face against his chest and let herself cry, great shuddering sobs that seemed to come from the very core of her being. "It's all right," Zachary murmured, his hand stroking her hair. "You're safe. I've got you. You stood up for me," Miriam managed between sobs. "You could have let them take me, could have washed your hands of me, but you stood up for me." "Of course I did. I love you, Miriam." Zachary tilted her face up to his, and his eyes were fierce with emotion. "I know it's only been a few weeks and maybe it's crazy, but I love you. I'd stand against the whole world for you if I had to." "I love you too," Miriam whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and inevitable. "I think I've loved you since that first morning at the creek when you offered me your hand." Zachary kissed her then, deep and thorough, pouring all his love and relief and promise into the connection of their lips. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Not because you owe me or because you need protection, but because I want to spend my life with you. Because I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you in my arms every night. Because I want to build a life together, a real life, full of all the ordinary beautiful moments that make a life worth living." "Yes," Miriam said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you, Zachary Frost. I'll marry you and spend the rest of my life proving that I can be worthy of your love." "You already are worthy," Zachary said softly. "But I'll spend the rest of my life proving it to you until you finally believe it." They were married 3 days later by a traveling preacher who passed through on his way to Santa Fe and asked no questions about the bride's past. It was a simple ceremony, just the two of them and the preacher standing by the stream in the golden light of sunset. But Miriam had never felt anything more profound than the moment when Zachary slipped a simple silver band onto her finger and promised to love and cherish her for all his days. That night, in the privacy of the cabin that was now truly their home, Zachary made love to her with such tenderness and care that Miriam cried. He took his time, learning every inch of her body, showing her what it meant to be desired rather than used, to be cherished rather than taken. He whispered her name like a prayer and touched her like she was made of precious things. And when they finally came together, it felt like two broken pieces finding their way into a perfect whole. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Miriam traced the line of Zachary's jaw with her fingertip. "I never thought I could be this happy," she admitted. "I spent so long believing I didn't deserve anything good that I don't quite know how to accept it now that it's here." "Then we'll learn together," Zachary said, capturing her hand and kissing her palm. "I'll tell you every day how much I love you, how grateful I am to have you in my life, until it becomes as natural as breathing for you to believe it." The months that followed, were the happiest Miriam had ever known. She and Zachary fell into a rhythm of work and love and simple domestic contentment. They expanded the vegetable garden and added more chickens to the coop. They trained the horses together, with Miriam discovering she had a real gift for gentling the more skittish animals. They talked for hours in the evenings, sharing stories from their pasts, making plans for their future, learning the thousand small details that make up a life shared with another person. As autumn painted the hills in shades of gold and crimson, Miriam realized she had gone an entire day without thinking about Garrett Mason, or the shooting or the fear that had haunted her for so long. The past was finally beginning to lose its grip on her, fading into something that had happened to her but did not define her. It was in late October, when the air turned crisp and the first frost kissed the ground, that Miriam realized she was pregnant. She knew before she even missed her monthly bleeding, knew it from the way her breasts felt tender and the way certain smells suddenly made her nauseous. When she told Zachary, his face lit up with such pure joy that Miriam felt her heart expand to make room for even more love. "A baby," he breathed, his hand coming to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Miriam asked, needing to hear him say it. Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. Zachary pulled her close and kissed her temple. "You've given me everything, Miriam. A home that feels full of life again, love that makes every day brighter, and now a child. I'm the luckiest man alive." "I'm the lucky one," Miriam corrected. "You saved me, Zachary, in every way a person can be saved." "No." Zachary cupped her face in his hands, his expression serious. "You saved yourself when you fought back against Mason. You saved yourself when you chose to trust me enough to come here. You saved yourself when you decided to believe you deserve love. I just got to be here to help you see what was in you all along." The pregnancy was not easy. Miriam was sick most mornings well into her 4th month, and her body ached with the changes it was going through. But Zachary was patient and attentive, bringing her crackers when she woke up nauseous, rubbing her feet when they swelled, holding her hair back when she had to rush outside to be sick. He never complained, never made her feel like a burden, just loved her through all of it with the same steady devotion he had shown from the beginning. Winter came hard that year, with snow piling up in the valley and temperatures dropping low enough that they had to bring the chickens into the barn to keep them from freezing. Miriam spent most of the cold months inside, growing round with child, knitting tiny clothes and blankets while Zachary handled the outdoor chores. In the evenings they sat by the fire and Zachary read aloud from the few books they owned, his deep voice washing over Miriam like a warm blanket. When spring finally arrived, melting the snow and coaxing green shoots from the earth, Miriam was huge and uncomfortable and eager to meet the child growing inside her. The baby came in early May, during a warm afternoon when the world smelled like rain and new grass. The labor was long and difficult, attended by a midwife from a neighboring ranch whom Zachary had ridden to fetch when Miriam's pains began. Miriam screamed and swore and crushed Zachary's hand in her grip, but when the midwife finally placed a squalling infant in her arms, all the pain evaporated like morning mist. "A boy," the midwife announced with satisfaction. "Strong and healthy with a good set of lungs on him." Miriam stared down at her son, overwhelmed by the tiny perfect fingers and the dark fuzz of hair and the way his face scrunched up when he cried. Zachary leaned over them both, his eyes wet with tears, and traced a gentle finger down the baby's cheek. "He's beautiful," Zachary said hoarsely. "You're beautiful. Thank you, Miriam. Thank you for this gift." They named him Daniel Zachary Frost, and he became the center of their world. Miriam had worried that she would not know how to be a mother, that her own fractured childhood had left her too broken to raise a child properly. But she found that love was a powerful teacher. She nursed Daniel and sang to him, and learned to read the subtle differences in his cries. Zachary was a devoted father, walking the floor with the baby when he was fussy, changing dirty nappies without complaint, making silly faces that had Daniel giggling once he was old enough to understand humor. Life was not always easy. The ranch barely produced enough income to keep them going, and there were times when money was tight and worry gnawed at Miriam's peace. Daniel went through a period of colic that had them all exhausted and frazzled. A drought the following summer killed half their vegetable garden and forced them to slaughter one of the cows they could not afford to feed. But through it all, Miriam and Zachary held tight to each other and to the love that had brought them together. Daniel grew into a curious, energetic toddler with his father's green eyes and his mother's dark hair. He followed Zachary everywhere, his chubby legs working hard to keep up as his father did chores. He climbed everything, got into everything, and had a laugh that could light up the darkest day. Watching Zachary teach their son to be gentle with the animals, to help with simple tasks, to say please and thank you, Miriam felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. When Daniel was 2, Miriam became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect, and in the spring of 1882 she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Rose. Sarah was quieter than Daniel had been, a solemn baby who watched the world with wide, dark eyes and rarely cried. Miriam fell in love all over again, marveling at how different 2 children from the same parents could be. The years rolled on, marked by the ordinary miracles of family life. Daniel started helping his father with real chores, gathering eggs and feeding the chickens with serious concentration. Sarah learned to walk and then to talk, her first word being "da" for Zachary, which made him ridiculously proud. The ranch slowly became more profitable as Zachary's reputation for training good horses spread, and they were able to add on a room to the cabin to give the children their own space. Miriam grew into her role as wife and mother, shedding the last vestiges of shame and self-doubt that had clung to her from her old life. She learned to accept Zachary's compliments without deflecting them, learned to see herself through his eyes as someone worthy of love and respect. She made friends with some of the neighboring ranch wives, women who accepted her without question and never asked about her past. She became known in the area as someone with a gift for healing sick animals, and people started bringing her injured horses and dogs to tend. It was 5 years after their marriage, on a warm June evening when Daniel was 4 and Sarah was 2, that the past made one final appearance. Miriam was in the garden pulling weeds while the children played nearby when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Her blood ran cold, old fear rising up like a ghost, but when she looked up she saw Sheriff Carson, older and grayer than the last time she had seen him, riding alone. Zachary came out of the barn, his posture tense, and positioned himself between the sheriff and his family. But Carson raised his hand in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he called out. "I've got news I thought you should hear." Miriam picked up Sarah and took Daniel's hand, walking over to stand beside Zachary. Her husband's arm came around her shoulders, solid and protective. Carson dismounted and approached slowly, respectful of their wariness. "Deputy Roy Mason died last month," he said without preamble. "Got thrown from a horse and broke his neck. With him gone, there's no one left who cares about bringing you in, Mrs. Frost." He nodded at Miriam. "The case is closed, forgotten. You're free to live your life without looking over your shoulder anymore." Miriam felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she had carried for so long she had almost forgotten it was there. "Thank you for telling us," she managed. "I thought you deserved to know." Carson's weathered face softened as he looked at the family before him, at the two children and the obvious love between husband and wife. "Looks like things worked out well for you both." "Better than I ever dreamed," Miriam said, leaning into Zachary's embrace. After Carson left, Miriam cried, but they were tears of relief and release rather than sorrow. That night, after the children were asleep, she and Zachary sat outside under the stars and talked about the journey that had brought them to this moment. "You ever regret it?" Miriam asked. "Taking me in that morning, choosing to stand by me, building this life with me." Zachary turned to her, his eyes reflecting the starlight, and smiled. "Not for a single second. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Miriam. You and our children, this life we've built together, it's more than I ever hoped to have." "I don't deserve you," Miriam said, but the words held no weight now, no conviction. They were just an old habit, a familiar phrase she did not truly believe anymore. "Then I'll prove you do every day," Zachary replied, just as he had 5 years ago by the creek, and he leaned in to kiss her with all the love and passion and devotion he had shown her from the very beginning. The years continued to pass, bringing the joys and challenges that come with any life fully lived. Daniel grew into a thoughtful boy who loved animals as much as his parents did, showing a particular talent for training horses that made Zachary's chest swell with pride. Sarah remained quieter but revealed a sharp intelligence and a gift for numbers that had her helping Miriam keep the ranch accounts before she was even 10 years old. When Daniel was 8 and Sarah was 6, Miriam became pregnant once more, a surprise baby that had her laughing at the thought of starting over with an infant at her age. Zachary was thrilled, and the children were excited to have a new brother or sister. This time, Miriam gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Matthew and Margaret. The twins were a handful, identical in looks with dark hair and green eyes, but opposite in temperament. Matthew was serious and careful while Margaret was wild and fearless, and between them they kept the household in happy chaos. The ranch prospered as the children grew. Zachary's horse training business expanded until they had buyers coming from as far as Santa Fe and Albuquerque. Miriam started a small side business breeding and selling chickens after discovering she had a knack for producing birds that were excellent layers. The children all pitched in with chores appropriate to their ages, learning the value of hard work and the satisfaction of contributing to something larger than themselves. Daniel was 16 when he started courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sweet girl named Emily, who Miriam welcomed with open arms. Sarah, at 14, announced her intention to become a teacher, a dream that Miriam and Zachary supported wholeheartedly, scraping together money to send her to a teaching college in Santa Fe when she was old enough. The twins at 8 were still too young to think much beyond the next adventure, but they were growing into kind, capable children who knew they were loved beyond measure. On a warm evening in the summer of 1890, Miriam sat on the porch she had helped Zachary expand years ago and watched the sun set over the valley that had become her home. She was 43 now, her dark hair shot through with silver, her hands roughened by years of labor. Beside her, Zachary was graying at the temples and had lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but he was still the man who had reached out his hand to her by the creek 12 years ago, still steady and kind and devoted. The children were scattered around the property. Daniel was in the barn with Emily, no doubt stealing kisses in the hay loft. Sarah was inside studying her books by lamplight. The twins were catching fireflies in the gathering dusk, their laughter floating on the warm breeze. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked, taking Miriam's hand and lacing their fingers together. "How far we've come," Miriam said softly. "That girl at the creek, she was so lost, so convinced she didn't deserve anything good. And now look at this life we've built. 4 beautiful children, a home, friends, respect in the community. It feels like a dream sometimes." "It's real," Zachary assured her, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing her knuckles. "It's real because you had the courage to accept help when it was offered, because you chose to believe that maybe you did deserve kindness after all." "You made me believe it," Miriam corrected. "Every single day, just like you promised. You loved me when I couldn't love myself. You saw worth in me when I couldn't see it. You stood by me when it would have been easier to walk away. You saved my life, Zachary." "And you saved mine," Zachary replied. "I was lonely here after Ma died, going through the motions of living without really feeling alive. Then you came into my life and everything changed. You brought laughter and love and purpose. You gave me a family. You made this house a home. I'm the one who should be grateful, Miriam." "Then I suppose we saved each other," Miriam said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I suppose we did." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, one by one, like pinpricks of light in a dark blanket. Miriam thought about all the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment, the pain and fear that had eventually led to more joy than she had ever imagined possible. She thought about the man she had killed in self-defense 12 years ago, and while she still regretted that he had died, she could no longer regret the circumstances that had sent her fleeing into the New Mexico wilderness, where she had found Zachary. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives are the ones that lead us to the best things, she reflected. Sometimes what feels like an ending is actually a beginning in disguise. Daniel emerged from the barn with Emily, both of them flushed and grinning, and Miriam felt a pang of nostalgia for her own young love. But then, Zachary squeezed her hand, and she realized that their love had not faded with time, had not been diminished by the mundane realities of daily life. If anything, it had grown deeper and richer, seasoned by shared experiences and strengthened by weathering storms together. "I love you," she said suddenly, turning to look at Zachary in the fading light. "I don't say it enough, but I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I love you too," Zachary replied, his eyes soft with emotion. "More than I did the day I married you, which I wouldn't have thought possible back then. But love keeps growing if you tend it right, and we've tended ours well." That night, after the children were all in bed and the house was quiet, Miriam and Zachary made love with the familiar ease of long practice, but with no less passion than their first time together. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Zachary's arms around her and his steady heartbeat under her ear, Miriam felt a peace so complete it brought tears to her eyes. She had built a good life from the ashes of her old one. She had created a family, a home, a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. She had learned that kindness existed in the world, that love could be steady and true, that she was worthy of both. And it was all because one cowboy had looked at a blood-soaked woman by a creek and decided to offer his hand instead of his judgment. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and the Frost family moved through them with grace and resilience. There were more challenges ahead. Daniel and Emily married when he was 18, and Miriam found herself a grandmother before she turned 45, marveling at the tiny baby boy named Zachary after his grandfather. Sarah left for teaching college, and while Miriam missed her daughter terribly, she was proud of the intelligent, capable young woman Sarah had become. The twins eventually settled down a bit, though Margaret retained her wild streak well into her teenage years, much to Miriam's amused exasperation. The ranch continued to thrive. Zachary took on Daniel as a full partner in the horse training business, and together they expanded their operation until they were known throughout New Mexico for producing some of the finest horses in the territory. Miriam's chicken breeding business also grew, and she found herself supplying birds to ranches across the region. They added on to the house again, creating a comfortable home that could accommodate their growing family when everyone came for Sunday dinners and holidays. White Oaks, which had once represented danger and fear to Miriam, became just another town they occasionally visited for supplies. No one remembered the shooting from so many years ago, and if anyone did remember the saloon girl named Miriam Keller, they did not connect her with the respectable Miriam Frost, who ran a chicken business and had 4 children and a reputation for helping injured animals. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Zachary surprised Miriam with a trip to Santa Fe, leaving the children in Daniel and Emily's care. It was the first time they had been away from the ranch together since before Daniel was born, and Miriam felt giddy as a schoolgirl as they checked into a hotel and wandered the streets of the city. Zachary bought her a new dress, a beautiful deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes, and they ate dinner at a restaurant where someone else did the cooking and serving. They went to see a play at the theater, holding hands in the darkness like young lovers. And that night in their hotel room, they made love slowly and thoroughly, taking their time to rediscover each other without the constant demands of children and chores. "I want to grow old with you," Zachary said afterward, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on Miriam's bare shoulder. "I want to see our grandchildren grow up and maybe even great-grandchildren. I want to sit on that porch when we're ancient and gray and hold your hand and remember all the years we've shared." "That sounds perfect," Miriam murmured, drowsy and content. "Though I hate to break it to you, but we're already getting gray." Zachary laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "True enough, but we've still got a lot of good years ahead of us." They did indeed. The years rolled on, bringing more grandchildren as Daniel and Emily had 3 more children, and Sarah eventually married a fellow teacher and had 2 children of her own. Matthew grew into a talented carpenter who helped build homes for several neighboring families, while Margaret shocked everyone by becoming one of the first female ranchers in the area, running her own small cattle operation with fierce determination. The twins never lost their closeness, even as their lives took different paths, and Miriam treasured watching them remain best friends well into adulthood. Zachary's hair went completely silver, and Miriam's followed suit, but they both remained healthy and active well into their 60s. They still worked the ranch together, though they turned over more of the hard physical labor to their children and grandchildren. They still sat on the porch every evening, watching the sun set over the valley they had made their own. They still loved each other with a depth and constancy that made younger couples shake their heads in wonder. It was on a crisp autumn evening in 1905, when Miriam was 58 and Zachary was 62, that they gathered their entire family for a celebration. 27 years had passed since that morning by the creek, and their family had grown to include 4 children, 3 sons and daughters-in-law, 12 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild on the way. They filled the expanded house and spilled out onto the porch and into the yard. 3 generations of Frosts gathered to celebrate the love that had started it all. Daniel stood to make a toast, his own hair starting to show silver now, his oldest son standing beside him. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us all what real love looks like, who showed us that family is built on kindness and respect and choosing each other every single day, who proved that it doesn't matter where you start in life, only how you finish. Happy anniversary, Ma and Pa. Here's to many more years together." Everyone cheered and drank, and Miriam felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were happy tears, grateful tears. She looked around at the sea of faces, all the people who existed because one cowboy had chosen kindness over judgment, because one woman had chosen to accept help instead of running forever. Late that night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Miriam and Zachary sat alone on the porch wrapped in a shared blanket against the chill. The stars overhead were brilliant, undimmed by any city lights, and the silence was peaceful rather than lonely. "Do you remember what you said to me that first morning?" Miriam asked softly. "When I told you I didn't deserve kindness." "I do," Zachary replied, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "I said I'd prove you do every day." "You kept that promise," Miriam said, her voice thick with emotion. "Every single day for 27 years, you've shown me kindness and love and patience. You've proved it so thoroughly that I can't imagine ever believing otherwise anymore." "Good," Zachary said simply. "That was the point." He turned to look at her, his green eyes still bright despite the lines around them. "You know what the best part is, though? Watching you finally see yourself the way I've always seen you, watching you become confident and strong and sure of your own worth. That's been the greatest joy of my life, Miriam, even more than our children and grandchildren, even more than the success of the ranch. Watching you bloom has been a privilege I'll treasure until my last breath." "I couldn't have bloomed without you," Miriam said. "You were the sunshine and the rain, the good soil I needed to put down roots." "No," Zachary corrected gently. "Those things were already in you. I just created a safe space for them to emerge. You did the real work, Miriam. You chose healing over bitterness, love over fear, hope over despair. That was all you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead, listening to the familiar night sounds of their ranch. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and closer by an owl hooted its hunting call. The horses shuffled in the barn, and the wind whispered through the cottonwoods by the stream. "I'm grateful," Miriam said finally, "for all of it, even the hard parts, because they led me here. Even Garrett Mason and the shooting, because if that hadn't happened, I would never have run and I never would have found you. I wouldn't wish for anyone to go through what I went through, but I can't regret my own path because it brought me to this life, this family, this love." "That's wisdom," Zachary observed. "Being able to hold both the pain and the gratitude together without letting one cancel out the other. You've come a long way from that scared girl by the creek, my love." "We both have," Miriam replied. "You were lonely too, remember? Looking for something to fill the emptiness left by your mother's death. We found each other when we both needed saving." "So we did," Zachary agreed. "And we saved each other, and then we built something beautiful together." The years continued as years do, bringing both joys and sorrows. Miriam's health began to fail when she was in her early 70s, her heart growing weak and her energy diminishing. Zachary tended her with the same devotion he had shown from the beginning, hiring help for the ranch so he could spend his days at her side. Their children and grandchildren visited frequently, and Miriam found comfort in their presence, in seeing the legacy she and Zachary had created spread out before her. On a warm spring morning in 1918, as the world outside dealt with war and pandemic, Miriam lay in the bed she had shared with Zachary for 40 years and knew her time was coming to an end. Her breathing was labored and her body felt heavy, ready to release its hold on her spirit. Zachary sat beside her, holding her hand, his own face lined with age but his eyes as clear and loving as ever. Their children were gathered in the room, adult now with children and even grandchildren of their own, but to Miriam they would always be her babies. "I'm not afraid," Miriam whispered, her voice weak but steady. "I've had such a good life, Zachary. Such a full, beautiful, love-filled life. I'm grateful for every moment of it." "I'm grateful too," Zachary said, tears sliding down his weathered cheeks. "Thank you for trusting me all those years ago. Thank you for letting me love you. Thank you for giving me this family, this life. You've been the greatest blessing I could have asked for." "Then I'll prove you do every day," Miriam said with a faint smile, throwing his own words back at him one final time. "I proved I deserved your kindness by accepting it, by letting it change me, by paying it forward to our children and grandchildren. I hope I made you proud." "You did," Zachary assured her, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "Every single day you made me proud. Every single day you proved that you were the strongest, bravest, most loving person I've ever known." Miriam's eyes drifted closed and her breathing slowed. Surrounded by the family she and Zachary had built together, wrapped in the love they had nurtured for 4 decades, she slipped peacefully away into whatever lay beyond. Zachary mourned her deeply, as did their children and the many grandchildren and great-grandchildren who had known her gentleness and wisdom. But they also celebrated her life at her funeral, telling stories of her kindness, her strength, her gift with animals, her fierce love for her family. They spoke of how she had overcome a difficult past to build something beautiful, how she had taught them all that where you come from matters less than who you choose to become. Zachary lived for 3 more years after Miriam's death, years during which he often sat on their porch and talked to her as though she were still beside him. He died peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1921, and his children buried him next to Miriam in the small cemetery on the hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together. The Frost Ranch continued for generations after, passed down through Daniel's line, and then to his children and grandchildren. The house was eventually replaced with a more modern structure, but the stream still ran through the valley, and the cottonwoods still grew along its banks. And on the hillside, 2 headstones stood side by side, marking the graves of Zachary Frost and Miriam Frost, with a simple inscription beneath their names. She whispered she didn't deserve kindness. He proved her wrong every day. Together they built a love that lasted a lifetime. It was a good ending to a story that had started with blood and fear, and a woman who believed she was beyond redemption. It was proof that kindness can change lives, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, that everyone deserves a second chance. And it was a legacy that lived on in every descendant who carried the Frost name, every person who heard the story and chose to offer kindness to someone who believed they didn't deserve it, because in the end, that's what love really is. It's choosing someone every day. It's proving through actions rather than words that they matter, that they're worthy, that they deserve all the good things life has to offer. It's standing beside them when the world tries to knock them down. It's seeing the beauty in them even when they can't see it themselves. Miriam and Zachary understood that from the very beginning, from that first morning by the creek when a cowboy offered his hand to a desperate woman, and she chose to take it. And they lived that understanding every day for the rest of their lives, building something lasting and beautiful from the ashes of what had been lost. Their story became legend in the area, passed down through generations as an example of what true love looked like. Young couples would visit their graves and promise to love each other with the same devotion Zachary and Miriam had shown. Old couples would tell their story and remind each other that love was a choice you made every morning when you woke up. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when they leave their earthly bodies, Miriam and Zachary were together still, proving that some loves really do last forever, that some bonds are too strong to be broken even by death. They had found each other when they both needed saving, had chosen each other when it would have been easier to walk away, had built a life that touched countless others and left the world a better place than they found it. That's the power of kindness. That's the miracle of love. That's what happens when one person looks at another and decides to prove, every single day, that they deserve all the good things they've been told they're not worthy of receiving. It changes lives. It creates families. It builds legacies that last long after we're gone. And it all started with a simple offer of a hand extended across a creek, and the courage to take it.